very happy that Professor Wiebke Loosen with us to talk to us about To the Rescue, the potentials and pitfalls of AI in journalism. So we're moving on more to the present and the future, I guess, to an extent, perhaps also looking and discussing later on concrete use cases. I mentioned in my introduction that sort of AI is already a fixture in certain segments of journalism, not in the sense that AI produces, a whole entire reports, but it is sort of playing into journalism or plays a role in journalism as a tool. Professor Loosen is probably going to be talking a bit about this as well. In any case, she's a senior journalism researcher at the Hans Bredow Institute for Media Research in Hamburg, also professor at the University of Hamburg. In her relationship, she looks into the interrelation of journalism, audiences, and organizations, which is fascinating and something that historically we also sort of just talked a bit about. She's a member of several national and international research networks, including one which I find particularly interesting on pioneer journalism, focusing precisely on that interrelationship and journalistic transformation, organizations, and technology, which I think fits really nicely to what we just heard and discussed. And without further ado, I think I want to turn the floor to you, Wiebke. I think you have a presentation as well, which you'll be able to run. In any case, yes, we're very happy you're with us. Thanks.
Thank you for the invitation. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to share my slides now. The host has activated screen sharing. That's why I asked in advance.
Activated or deactivated?
Deactivated, sorry.
That shouldn't be.
So you need to make me a co-host or something.
Happened.
Okay, here we go. Okay. Yes, thank you very much again for the invitation and the possibility to talk here. To the Rescue, Potentials and Pitfalls of AI in Journalism. To be honest, that was that is your title, and I only realized 2 weeks ago that I might have changed the title, but let's see what I deliver under that question. So in the end, it was very stimulating for me to think about AI in terms of potential and pitfalls, what I usually don't do. Last week, I told a friend that I was preparing this talk. She is a journalist and one who works primarily for TV, but also does a lot of other things. Like me, she's over 50, has a classical journalistic training, and tries to keep up with the rapid development in her field. I would like to read what she wrote to me on WhatsApp on that subject. She said, okay, that doesn't work right now. Okay. Oh, I find that totally exciting. I would have read up on the topic first, but spontaneously the thought came to me that the reportage, immediate experience, personal assessment, entertainment, everything a journalist incorporates outside of dry facts can never be replaced by AI. And if it should come to that, I don't know if I want to witness that. The thought alone scares me. I also find the aspect so important that this development is accompanied by self-alienation and with self-doubt and a shaking of identity. If an algorithm comes closer to what constitutes me, my empathy, my sense, and my perception, then I am, so to speak, threatened in my mental existence. I wanted to start by quoting this because I think it is important that we realize that this topic is always about fears and concerns. The fear of being replaced by technology, of becoming superfluous. And such worries can also come up when, like here, there's basically a pretty good sense of what AI can do and cannot do. I also see that in the field of journalism, there's quite a big gap between the so-called computational journalists and AI experts who see great potential in AI and the automation of journalistic work, and those who have only a little knowledge of these development and a fear of being replaced. Journalism itself is not entirely innocent of the concern that AI can replace human journalists. After all, journalistic coverage on this topic is often about so-called robot journalism. Then we are talking about software systems that can generate texts. These two examples are articles from the Süddeutsche Zeitung and the Guardian from this summer, dealing about GPT-3, which is currently considered the most complex language AI. Some media have come up with a special twist here and have reported about GPT-3 with GPT-3 by letting the NLP system itself write texts on the topic. Such so-called robot journalism is probably the use case we read or see most in journalism itself. How in general, most of us are likely to know most about AI in journalism from journalistic reporting itself. This probably even applies to me as a researcher, because there is not yet so much research on that topic in journalism research. This is important to say beforehand, because today, in the present, we are very much concerned with the future of AI in journalism. In other words, we are in part well ahead of our time. However, these imaginations are not just fantasies, but contribute decisively to what the future present will be like, even if we cannot say exactly how. However, when it comes to the use of technologies or innovations in journalism, it is very often about potentials that are seen and about the shortcomings that are simultaneously identified in the adoption or exploitation of these potential by journalism. Journalism lags behind the possibilities, is often said. In my opinion, however, we should distance ourselves a bit from this perspective, because technology is not something that is simply implemented, but rather is created, developed, and used in complex social contexts. That is also what you mentioned in your talk just before, Martin. And when it comes to AI, journalism is a very special case of application. And it involves forms of automation of communication that affect journalism in its internal work processes. And by doing so, always also with regard to the way journalism observes society and makes this observation available to us in the shape of reporting on the world. It is therefore of little use to focus on the most prominent example of robot journalism and of automated creation of content. AI in journalism stands for a much broader application context. I think this can be illustrated very well with the following definition of the non-definition of AI. It comes from a study for which over 50 media organizations in over 30 countries were surveyed about their views on and use of AI and associated technologies. Newsroom definitions of AI can be very various, and it is rather used as an umbrella term referring to a range of related technologies driven by algorithms. This non-definition definition by the BBC is particularly characteristic for that. The BBC doesn't have a single specific definition of artificial intelligence. The term is used to mean different things to different people and is often used to refer generally to the frontier of advanced technologies. Some common things that people mean by the term artificial intelligence at the BBC are technologies based on machine learning of any kind, technologies that are represented as intelligent agents, such as voice agents or chatbots, technologies that automate tasks that previously required people to do, robot journalism, and products that use artificial intelligence sometimes fit in all three of these categories. This already illustrates that the forms of, I'd say, AI-informed automation can be very manifold, at least with regard to the potential they could have for journalistic work. This means that we are dealing with a whole range of different use cases and possible applications. In the following, I will illustrate this in more detail using the news circle with the phases of observation, production, distribution, and consumption. And I have a spiral, and I built it for this PowerPoint presentation. It definitely was not easy because it is constructed of different parts of this spiral-like. So such a circular understanding, and you always emphasized that just before, Martin, such a circular understanding of the news process makes it clear that when journalists observe the world, in other words, what they perceive, identify, select, and research as topics, they always have an idea of what their audience could expect, would find interesting, or should know. So that is why a circle makes much more sense than a linear production line, so to say. In today's journalism, this news circle is more or less closely linked to processes of data generation, data processing, and data interpretation. That means processes of datafication with data generation, data processing, and data interpretation are encompassing the news, the news circle, so to say. More or less in this case means that related data-based practices, as they have evolved in data journalism, for example, are used to varying degrees in newsrooms, but also by individual journalists. Some of them are very data savvy, so to say, and others are not. This also applies to the use of AI-based technologies in journalism. So when I talk of, I found the term of forms of AI-informed automation in journalism, because not every automation is where AI is involved, but as we just heard from the definition, so there are blurring borders and people are often not sure is an AI involved or not. And to be honest, I'm often always also not sure because I'm not a computer scientist, but a journalism researcher like you, trying to make sense of this technology and what it means for journalism. The observation phase is about the question of when and on what basis something becomes a journalistic topic is considered newsworthy. This is where data mining gains in importance, which describes discovering new knowledge from data in its broadest sense. Data mining is often enabled by machine learning, looking algorithms that allow computers to learn patterns from data in the broadest sense, finding the news in data by looking for anomalies, connections between entities, or patterns in data sets. Those techniques are, for example, applied in modern data journalism, but also for event detection in social media. Yeah? Newsrooms monitor social media in order to identify peaks on certain events or topics people are talking about each other. to each other. We have already talked about the so-called robot journalism. However, the term is misleading as it evokes the association of journalism as a fully automated industry that operates without humans. In fact, however, this field in particular requires a great deal of manual work. Structured data is needed that runs into text templates, which can then be automatically generated into texts. You could imagine that as a template where you have certain elements that can vary with respect to the data that you feed in there. In journalism, we therefore tend to find hybrid forms of manually created text modules, decision trees, and structured data, and so-called template-based text generation. So it requires a lot of, as I already said, manual work to enable these automation process. However, AI is also increasingly found in tools that use editors for word processing that offer more than simple spell checking. So even before content production, there can be a lot of AI involved in journalistic work processes. Intelligent editors as part of content management systems, for example, that suggest suitable links, suggest changes, convert currencies, write summaries, provide numbers for background information, and etc. So that is also important. I'd say that we also look behind the scenes and not only at the products that are automated by that are provided by automation. Now I turn to the distribution phase. Automation and machine learning are also of particular importance in distribution. On the one hand, the distribution of journalistic content can be increased by automated translation, for example, or by text-to-speech applications, so where it's pretty easy in these days to enable a bot that transforms text into an audio file. So in order that you can listen to the news instead of reading it. On the other hand, user profiles, data generated by user profiles generated by data enable the personalization of content. We talk a lot about news recommender systems and how could we guarantee that suggestions for personalizations don't lead into a filter bubble, for example. These options of multiple use and reassembling of content can make machine learning economically interesting for media organizations. According to all that is known, the potential of AI is currently used primarily in the distribution and personalization of news. I turn to consumption now. One of the special features of data-based journalism is that demand and supply in the news circle can be coupled ever more closely. It is therefore no coincidence that the explosion and use of audience analytics in the newsroom is one of the most intensively researched topics in journalism research, which is always concerned with the question in which ways audience analytics influence journalistic decisions. Machine learning, for example, plays a special role in predictive analytics. I don't know if you heard about that. It sounds a bit strange. So predictive policing, so we are familiar with, but predictive analytics is also something. Publishers use it to calculate the probability scores for the signing or cancellation of subscriptions. So that is so-called churn management. in order to be able to address users with targeted offers. So if data suggests that you are about to sign or cancel a subscription of a newspaper, for example, they can address you with a special offer saying, so please think about if we offer you 50% less or something like that. We also find applications like chatbots for interactions with users and increasingly intelligent systems that help analyzing and moderating user comments. In fact, I have a project together with, let me count, 5 computer scientists, all working on analytics for how to analyze user comments automatically. So, and this is very a hot topic, not also when it comes to moderation, to identify, for example, hate speech in user comments, but also in order to develop analytics that help to identify, let's say, useful user comments that journalists could use for journalistic coverage or research, or to identify people to talk, sources, people to talk with, for example. Or at least only to identify if they are, as a newsroom, are addressed in user comments and should answer a question. Yeah. Distribution, personalization, and analytics significantly and essentially form a shared data cycle for the collection and evaluation of user data for journalistic and business strategy purposes. And I think that is very important to stress that these audience data is, when it comes to the consumption phase, is used to different, or can be used to different ends, for journalistic purposes and also for the more business strategy purposes, if we want to make a difference there. Yeah. As we can't go into all details here on all areas here, I have also compiled some of the practical use cases that will be covered in the program of the Journalism AI conference in early December. And for me, as a researcher, that is also a good way to get a sense of what kind of questions are discussed in the field itself. And here you find workshops on how we build an algorithm that helps us investigate government contracts and unveil corruption cases in Peru. That is related to the observation phase. So how can we find news connections in large data sets, something that is done in data journalism, as I already said. Can AI help us put the power of our archives in the hand of our journalists? That is also a very interesting topic. So how can AI help better use journalistic archives or archives of media organizations by tagging content and make it better searchable, for example? Creating news story formats from existing text articles using automation that I would say refers to the distribution or also to the production side. So how can we use AI to resemble text that has already been written for a certain channel and use it again, resembling it and summarizing it differently for Twitter, for example? How might automated summaries help us increase discoverability and accessibility of the very best journalism we produce? Again, content production in combination with redistributing. And the very important and big topic when it comes to consumption and audiences, how to understand and engage with our consumers using AI and machine learning. And that is interesting because AI and machine learning are not two different things, but as far as I understand, machine learning is one field under the umbrella term of artificial intelligence. So AI, the future of journalism, question mark. So will the future of journalism be artificial intelligence? First of all, we have to keep in mind datafied communication processes are both a condition and a possibility and are both a condition of the possibility and the product of automation. We can also say automation leads to automation. And that is what we can also witness. So we have more and more texts being produced automatically, and with that also features that try to understand automatically, so to say. Yeah, automation leads to automation. If we believe those who see above all the potentials such as of AI in journalism, such as news agencies or AI experts from the field itself, then AI is definitely the future of journalism. There's a lot of talk of, for example, iterative journalism, in which there is a data-driven feedback loop to optimally align output with consumer needs, and of the cybernetic newsroom, or journalism that combines AI with humans. So I particularly find interesting this term of iterative journalism, because iterations is something that you know from software development, for example, that you develop software in diverse iterations with a lot of feedback loops of potential users, for examples, or in the field. And here we see that this terminology from software development is adapted by journalism, or comes to journalism as well. Or we find the notion of the algorithmically augmented journalist and the artificially intelligent news organization. Such scenarios lead us to the question of what kind of AI-informed journalism do we want in the end? So I argue that, first of all, here a dual perspective is necessary. First, we have to acknowledge journalism operates in an increasingly datafied and algorithmed society. So that means the trends that we are discussing today are do not only appear in journalism, but also in other fields of society. Yeah, think of insurance companies, think of medicine, think of economy, of course. So that means the society that journalism observes or is reporting about is also increasingly driven by data. So it's nothing that the field of journalism is only experiencing. So that is important, I would say. And journalistic practices, so the internal perspective, are increasingly data-based and let's say AI-informed. So indeed, we talk about, and that is also what Martin said, we have to look at this interrelation between organizations, technology, audiences, or practitioners, technology and audiences. And I would say we talk about hybrid figurations of humans and machines. And the crucial question is here, in which ways are AI-driven or AI-informed software systems involved in journalistic performances? When it comes to automation in journalism, we do not talk about automating the production of, let's say, cars. That is why we need, I would say, an AI-literate journalism that makes the data society understandable and criticizable by its own means. So that means you also need to be able to cover that topic, not only to work with these technologies. So maybe it could be the case that it's more important that you are able to understand in order to cover it than to become an AI expert yourself as a journalist. And I would say we need a journalism that is well aware that journalism is not a technical disseminator of information, but part of societal communication processes. Because automation in journalism means automating communication processes. We could also say we talk about communicative automation, and that stands for a process that reaches deep into the communicative DNA of our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wiebke. Thank you very much for your input. Very fascinating. I have many questions already, and it was indeed exactly what we were looking for, this kind of behind the scenes look and the kind of stock taking, shedding light on the variety of different concepts and developments that constitute sort of the subject of today's discussion. So thank you very much. I think you made it a lot clearer for us. Again, I don't want to monopolize my position. I do have questions, particularly pertaining to your last remarks in the question, in which way are AI-informed processes involved in journalistic purposes, and sort of adding to this, in which ways should they be involved in this? What purposes do they serve? Is it about efficiency and cost cutting, or is it really about unleashing resources for journalistic creativity and new forms of journalism that really serve the public discourses? I would be curious to see where you see sort of the pendulum swinging, because we all know these fascinating cases of sort of automated infographics and what the Guardian does and Site Online and so on, and these sort of these pilot cases, and many of them actually financed by the Google News Initiative, I believe, which is something else we'll be looking into later. Nevertheless, this is the one side where it really can improve, support journalists and improve the journalistic product. But then on the other hand, of course, we have developments where it's really just about cost cutting, and we're seeing this sort of in local journalism in the US in particular, and so on. You know the cases. But so maybe this would be one thing where it'd be interested to hear your views on. But if there are other questions at the moment, both from our panel or our audience, I'd be happy to take those as well. Again, for our audience, just make sure you raise your virtual hand, and I elevate you to speaker status. But I see none among our panelists. Not for the moment. Wiebke, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, as I already said, so we are only at the beginning as researchers to deal with that topic. So there are a lot of conceptual papers, and first also empirical informed papers on that. But to be honest, from that side, we only know little. So if you look at the papers you find on automated journalism or robot journalism, for example, and interview data, of course, media organizations say we use it to, or the technology has the potential to automate, to free journalists from boring tasks and give them more time to do in-depth research, for example. Of course, the potential is there, but if you use the technology to that end, that's a different question. So again, it depends on in which way do you implement it in the newsroom or in a media organization, and if you use it for cost cutting or not. And there is a difference between what I would say media organizations or managers say and what they do in the end. Of course, and coming back to the quote by my friend in the beginning, so that the fear of being replaced is nothing, I would say, that you shouldn't care about. Of course, the technology has the potential to replace journalists. It depends on what your work description is, so to say. Yeah. It is, for me, it is no wonder that an industry or an institution, whatever you want to call it, like journalism, which is so dependent on texts and language, and that is the field in AI that where the development is so very fast, that there are tasks that you can turn in, that you can automate. Of course, you can do that. So when I think about the beginning in journalism research, so in empirical journalism research, there was a phase where it was very important to stress that the newsroom works like a factory, so to say. Yeah, it is not so decisive what an individual journalist think or does, but it is important to look at how the system operates. And from that phase, we know a lot about the fact that producing news is very, can be like working in a factory. And of course, these are tasks that can be replaced by artificial intelligence or by automation strategies, of course. That is not to say that you can replace or automate every single tasks journalists perform, but there's definitely potential to automate this. And again, it depends on how you use the technology in the end in the media organization.
You mentioned the audience or that dimension, but primarily sort of as the object of automated processes and sort of predictive analysis. I think you mentioned. I was wondering whether is there any research on public's or people's expectations, perceptions when it comes to automated journalism? I mean, this whole dimension of credibility, acceptance, or trust, again, we're only at the beginning, but in my knowledge, I mean, there are certain journalistic products, weather reports, sports news, and so on, that are already practically produced, not by humans, these very simple sort of genres. And is there research on what people expect of it and what people think of it? And perhaps sort of another issue, which sort of we advertised this event with, what are the implications? Which rules, which ethics do these new forms or techniques in journalism require? Which, should there be a labeling requirement and so on? What's your thought on this?
Yeah. First of all, there is research on that. So, for example, research that by doing experiments, for example, are people able to decide whether a text was written by a machine or by a human? So in most of the cases, they are not able to decide. And it is interesting when people ask, and again, it depends on the way you ask. So if you ask people, so what would you prefer, news recommended by an algorithm or by a human editor? So in the end, most of the people want both. So they see a use in both things. So it could be personalization is nothing that people don't want, automated personalization. But again, we also know from surveys that they also want transparency. Yeah. And to be honest, we don't know how much content in the field of journalism is already produced by automated means, because I would say not every media organization would flag that out and say that we have this example of course, but I would say not every media organization does that. And I think transparency in that respect is a very crucial point, as that is a quality criteria in journalism ever since, that you make clear what are the sources your reporting is based on. And that is, when it comes to automation, a very crucial fact, because the sources is data. And here you need to be very careful and sensible with the facts. So what we tend to talk more about algorithms than about data, but at least I would say the data is more important that runs through the algorithm, because that is the crucial point, and the sources automation is based on.
Thank you very much. I was just informed that we do indeed have a question by Mirko Lorenz, who asks, couldn't automated AI-driven or data-driven journalism, the combination of that, be utilized as an opportunity for really new business models in journalism? Maybe it's just me, but I believe there is an emerging market for individual data and information brokering.
I'm not sure if I understand the question right. So, but what we see when it comes to data journalism, so we see a lot of high prestigious projects. So big newsrooms are doing and experimenting with data journalism, but also, yeah, I once did a content analysis on data-driven pieces that were awarded for the data-driven data journalism award. So that is only a small amount. Yeah. So to be honest, it is very difficult to oversee all these different projects as the development is so fast. But from that study, we have learned that in the beginning of data journalism of the period that we looked at, the beginning was 2013, we had a lot of interactive features in data journalism. So there was a lot of experimenting in data journalism, for example, but with the normalization of data journalism in the next days, years, we saw a decrease in these interactive features and the possibilities that users have to filter data and to manipulate that kind of data-driven piece that they see on their screen. And when talking to data journalists, and maybe we can also discuss that later, because I'm not a practitioner, I only observe what is happening in the field. Data journalists told me, so we are so insecure if there's a market for that or an audience for that. From time to time, we have the feeling that we produce that prestigious or very work-intensive pieces of data journalism more for colleagues in order to show that we are able to do that instead of for an audience. So that is definitely something, but we also see a normalization of data journalism. And here I would say to that question, yes. So data journalism is not vanishing anymore. And because, as I said, so the society itself is becoming more and more datafied. So I would say journalists don't have another opportunity to make themselves familiar with that evolution. Otherwise, they won't be able to cover that or also to investigate this development and to understand how also different fields in society more and more base their sense making on data-driven processes. So that is a process that goes hand in hand, I would say. So data broker, that was was raised. Yeah, as far as I know, I'm not sure, but as far as I know, there are people already around looking for data. With particular respect to journalistic needs and applications. And here we see in that development the heavy reliance of data journalism. Data journalism needs data to provide data journalism, of course. And the other coin, or the other side of that coin is if journalists only turn to topics where data is, we also need to care about the blind spots of data journalism, so to say, and the reliance on data is also an issue.
Thanks.
Just one question. There would be an intuitive perspective that one could imagine that the simpler forms of journalism would vanish with machine learning. I prefer the term machine learning because there's no artificiality in AI. It's just a natural process of evolution, technological evolution. So I'm not quite sure what AI is, but that's an old discussion. But machine learning is correct. That machine learning will replace those simple news messages or some people who do that. Or would that be, would that perspective to be too simple itself? So that journalism, paradoxically, through machine learning, will get more complex and highbrow than it is today, because the simpler forms of journalistic tasks could vanish.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah.
So if you think of weather forecasts, for example,
Yeah.
so that is the most important, the most common issue or example people give when they talk about automating the news.
Yeah.
So weather forecasts or
Great, that's entertainment business. That's entertainment.
Economic news,
Yeah.
so reporting on economics. So
yeah.
there's a
If
lot
I
of...
Sorry, may I just connect this with a final question? And I think it fits well because also with regard to Lutz's point on AI, it reminded me of what our panelist later, Cory Doctorow, said, who was always sort of emphasizing that at this point in time, artificial intelligence is nothing more than really statistical inference techniques, and which is why it's good at weather reports and so on, but not so good when it comes to producing, say, political journalism, analysis, commentary, and so on. But with coming sort of back as maybe as a sort of final question in this session, also to your remarks in the beginning and to the message of your friend, which you read to us. What do you actually expect, say, in our lifetime? Do you see that down the road sometime? This possibility advances that would actually lead to content production at this level and going beyond the use cases that we were just talking about? Sorry, but I think it connects also to the point you were just making.
I would say already today, without using machine learning, we have a lot of journalism that looks like being produced automatically.
Yeah, absolutely.
So so saying that, I would say that we will witness a differentiation between a lot of routine information that is produced automatically. I'm not sure if we will call that journalism then, and but I don't have such a bad prediction for journalism, because what we refer to when we talk about journalism, the function of journalism, we will need that more than ever, I would say.